mixed up together.
So you have for this disaster has bipartisan parentage.
Absolutely.
But yet you say it's come to an end. You say there will be no pretense any longer that the financial system is supreme.
Oh, there may be a pretense in some quarters. I mean, obviously people who are doing the bailouts are saying how important it is that we don't rock or endanger the financial system. Some would say, to the contrary, that the best thing we could do would be to put its failings out there and let the market cure it. I don't expect that to be the prevailing view. We've had 25 years of what I call financial mercantilism, which is the government aiding and pushing and bailing out the financial sector. It's not going to change. But I do think finance is going to lose its control over the economy, in the sense that the public is going to be so angry they're going to insist on more regulation. And you can see that both presidential contenders are now talking somewhat more regulation and anger at finance. So I think that'll crimp their style a little bit, but I'm afraid that the horse is way out of the barn.
But as we speak, central banks are pouring billions of dollars into the global economy. Is this a palliative or is this a panacea?
Oh, I think it's a tricky game. In one respect, they want to make a lot of money available to make it easier to get lending unfrozen. The second thing they want to do is support the dollar, which is under enormous pressure now because people say it's not a storehouse of anything. If you want to keep your money safe, put it in gold. So they're worried about the huge rise that gold had in this week. So I think what we're looking at here is an attempt, really, like a drunk will feel better and get over his hangover better, sometimes just by having more liquor. And I think what we're seeing here with the actions of the Federal Reserve Board is the people who were the arsonists, the people who pumped it all up, who blew up the bubble, are now racing to show up in firemen's hats and say, we're going to solve it. We're going to take care of all this. Oh, and by the way, we're going to keep pumping in the gasoline that we pumped in before that made a good flame, but, you know, nobody knows that.
Are you suggesting that the best thing to do is let the house burn down and then build it over again?
I would say, first of all, you never should have blown the bubble this way. If we could invent a time machine and go back and cure it, that would be the best economics of all. Having blown it up, I think the case is that they should have accepted more of the tough medicine beginning last year and not tried to rescue every stray tentacle of the financial octopus.
But they didn't. We don't have a timeline, so here we are. Where are we?
Where we are, in my opinion, is about halfway through. Halfway through the serious part.
Halfway to the bottom?
It depends what you use in terms of bottom. I mean, in some ways, real estate prices were lower in 1936, 37 than they were in 1929 or 30. So I'm not sure exactly what you use as the measurement, real estate, the stock market, but it's a package which Americans have to understand is going to be awful. We're probably going to wind up nationally losing 20 to 30% of the average value of homes. The stock market will, right now it's in the middle 10,000s. The people who are nervous but not super bears expect that the Dow will go back down into the 9,000s. But what people have to remember is that in 2000, the Dow was 11,700. If you take off where it's lost since then and you adjust for inflation, you're looking at a 30 to 40% decline. So houses are matched in a way by what's happening in stocks.
So we're all going to be poor. Well, not all.
Well, we're not all going to be poor because there are people in Wall Street who've used all this new technology basically to bet the other way. I mean, one of the things that finance can do now, it can bet on anything. It's like Las Vegas merged with insurance and real estate people. And they have figured out new ways to gamble. And they can gamble on how many people in Ohio are going to lose their shirt.
So who do you trust anymore? I mean, you write in your book that the most worrisome thing is the extent of official understatement and misstatement, the preference for minimizing how many problems there are and how interconnected they are.
Well, just to give you an example of how many there are, Alan Greenspan has finally decided to admit, yeah, this may be one of those once-a-century biggies. Well, what makes it fascinating is that I sometimes use the description, 7 sharks. There are 7 sharks in the tank with the economy. And the first is financialization, because we're so dependent on this industry that sort of half lost its marbles. The second is that you've had this huge buildup of debt, absolutely unprecedented anywhere in the world. The third is you've now got home prices collapsing. The fourth is you've got global commodity inflation building up. The fifth is you've got flawed and deceptive government economic statistics. The sixth is that you've got what they call peak oil, where the world is to some extent running out of oil. So it's not just commodity inflation, it's a shortage of oil. And then the last thing is the collapsing dollar. Now, whenever you get this sort of package in one decade, you got a big one. And when Greenspan says it's a once a century, I think it's another variation, but on a par with the 30s.
So what do you think when you hear John McCain and Secretary Paulson say that the fundamentals, however, are solid?
Well, John McCain once said he didn't know anything about economics, and half the time what he says, proves it on a day-by-day basis. I don't think we have a sound economy at all, not remotely at this point. I mean, there are like 10 yardsticks I could use. Paulson is your typical Treasury Secretary guy that has to deal with it, and everybody knows he has to exaggerate. He has to say all the Hoover-type stuff about how strong the economy is and the recession's going to be over in 3 months and that sort of stuff. I don't really credit these people very much, but frankly, I don't credit the Democrats either.
No, I was going to say Obama's trademark rhetoric of inspiration seems to desert him when he talks about economic affairs.
He doesn't seem to have anything very specific to say. That's part of the problem. A second problem is, for me at least, just as I can't believe that John McCain ever wanted to get his economic advice from Phil Gramm. I mean, Phil Gramm, a former Texas senator, is appalling. He and his wife were known as Mr. and Mrs. Enron because they were so flagrant. That's McCain. But then you've got Obama with Bob Rubin, and he doesn't have any problem with the hedge fund types. I mean, one of the Chicago people was a major financer of his. He gets a guy to pick his vice president. Turns out to be somebody who was part of the Fannie and Freddie mess. So I don't exactly see Obama as this fellow riding in on a horse who represents all kinds of reformism. It's an important thing probably to have a change from the Republicans, but I don't see that he is free of the ties to finance and Democratic Party financial types.
I've known you a long time. Are you reaching the point where you're leaving yourself and us despairing?
Well, I'm not despairing, because one of the things, as you know, when you get to be more or less our age, you've got grandchildren you can feel young with. But I'm sick of Washington. It really deserves the fact that 81% or 85% of the people think we're on the wrong track. I mean, we are on the wrong track. I wish I could say that there's a blueprint that would get us back on the right track, but my sense of the histories of previous leading world economic powers is you don't get back on the right track.
So what happened?
You go through a painful adjustment process. The British were absolutely top dog in the world in 1914. 2 world wars, and 35 years later, they were having, after World War II, they were having food rationing. A pound sterling crashed. Dukes were giving guided tours of their castles because they couldn't afford to maintain them otherwise. It doesn't take long. And I'm afraid the United States is coming right into that period, which marks a couple of decades coming up that are going to be very difficult for Americans.
You wrote in that American Prospect piece that